Welcome, everyone who's watching what professes to be a truly fascinating event. It's a collaborative event between the International Music and Arts Society and the Bangalore International Centre and features author Moin Mir with his new book, The Lost Fragrance of Infinity. What a fascinating title, Moin. Draws us right in. He will be in conversation with Rana Safvi. Before we go any further, I hope you'll indulge me for just a moment. I'd like to present a photograph of my mother, Ila Chandrasekhar. Thank you, Raghu, for putting that up. It's a photograph taken by Lekha Naidu. Thank you, Lekha, for taking it and also for finding it in your archives. Um, my mother was the president of the International Music and Arts Society for many years, and I think this is almost perhaps the last physical appearance she made for the IMAS at the BIC. She passed away a few weeks ago, and I couldn't really launch into today's program without paying a small tribute to her. The thing is, the IMAS, despite its wide membership and its very wide reaching artist portfolio of people who come from all over the world, has a very personal element. And I do believe that pretty much everyone who's watching would have certainly seen my mother, probably met her, and most of you would have known her. So thank you for that small indulgence. On to the program. Um, I know my mother would have been fascinated about today's conversation. Moin already has appeared for the IMAS with his previous book when he was in conversation with William Dalrymple when they examined the rapacity, to quote Moin, of the East India Company in India. That was wonderful, but this new book promises much. It's a journey of a protagonist, of a man who faces shattering circumstances, and you see from the blurb that it follows different geographies, follows the path of Sufism as it travels through the globe, and it is a book that ends with a man who revives his sense of faith, hope, and love. Now, that I think is something that's quite remarkable in today's very difficult world that we all live in. So I am just waiting to read the book. Um, the other reason why I think my mother would have been thrilled, and I think we all are, at having Moin at the IMAS, is because he's not the first in his family to appear for the society. His father appeared some years ago, the Nawab of Surat and Kamadia, Nawab Mir Jafar Imam, who completely charmed us. He and his wife, Anis Begum, completely charmed the society and developed important friendships, I think, both with the IMAS and with its many members. And so that is an additional aspect that is a great pleasure for all of us. Um, Moin is going to be in conversation with Rana Safvi, the marvelous Rana Safvi. I call her really moderator par excellence because I've seen her at many literature festivals. I think the first time we were all together was at the wonderful Kasoli Lit Fest, which is really a privilege to be at. But Rana spoke, moderated a session that I had arranged for the Kalagoda Arts Festival with three powerful scholars, three powerful women, three historians, three translators, each with very strong views and opinions. And she negotiated this landscape with aplomb and drew out the very best that the conversation possibly could have been. So, Rana, really the moderator par excellence. I really deeply look forward to this book and this conversation about an examination of the philosophical aspects of Sufism and how it impacts a person's life. and a person's sense of themselves.
Moin Mir, as Indira has so graciously and gracefully described, was born and raised in India. He started writing under the influence of his grandfather, a scholar of Sufism, Umar Khayyam and Mirza Ghalib. He is the author of the critically acclaimed book Surat, Fall of a Pot, Rise of a Prince. This book, The Lost Fragrance of Infinity, is his second book, and this book, steeped in Sufism, is also something which goes with Muin's background. He is the descendant of Hazrat Maudud Chishti, one of the stalwart founders of the Chishti Sufi order. And he is also the scan of the Nawab family of Surat and next in line to succeed his father at the Darbar of Kamadia, Gujarat. He lives in London with his wife, and we'll come to that also.
All right. So, Moin Mir, Rana, the floor is yours.
Start with before I start my asking Muin about his book, I just like to quote Carl Ernst. For the Sufi tradition, the Quran frames all of time and eternity into 3 days. Yesterday is the day of creation when God created the universe and sealed the destiny of his lovers. Today is the world when all are called upon to live according to God's wishes. Tomorrow is the resurrection and the judgment day when souls will testify against themselves and be held to account, and God's mercy will be displayed. And just now, we are in a moment of infinity and in which Muin will be bringing out its fragrance for all of us to savor and to enjoy. So, Muin, before I already introduced you that you were influenced by your grandfather, who was a scholar of Sufism, and that you are a descendant of Hazrat Maudud Chishti. But I'd still like to ask you whether this book is a result of your childhood steeped in Sufism, depend and your the fact that you're descended from a Chishti saint, one of the founders of the Chishti silsila, and why is it that you chose to write this book as a novel and not as a non-fiction?
Firstly, thank you so much, Rana Appa, for introducing me and for agreeing to be here and talking about my book. It's an absolute honor to be here with you, and I also thank Urmila Devi ji and Indira and everyone at BIC for giving me the opportunity. Yes, I was deeply influenced by my grandfather. He was a man who was very active in two societies in Bombay, which were the Theosophical Society as well as the Indo-Arab Society, and his works, alongside Dr. Rafiq Zakaria and other illuminaries, deeply influenced me as I was growing up. Particularly his analysis of Umar Khayyam's philosophy and the way Mirza Ghalib looked at the stature of man and his philosophy, rather than looking at Ghalib merely as a poet. Having lived under his stewardship for many years, and my grandmother's stewardship, I was drawn towards Sufism from a very young age. Um, uh, Also, the fact that one's ancestry in some way or the other, somehow always looms in some kind of a fashion over your rather weak shoulders when you're a young boy or a young girl. And in many ways, this particular legacy that had come down from generations of Hazrat Maudud Chishti, it didn't lie heavy on my shoulders. In fact, it lured me to understand Sufism right from childhood. The virtues of humanity, the virtues of seeking within, and the virtues of looking for creativity within you as you kind of look at yourself as part of the greater creative force. So these were things that that influenced me as a child, it brought me into a sense of uh, understanding of Sufism from a standpoint of thought, as well as Sufism from a standpoint of as a creative energy. So there's one thing which is Sufism as a thought, as a philosophy, as how man perceives his stature as a microcosm as well as an ashraful makhlukat. So you can have that complete width where the Sufis see man as nothing but a minutest of minutest creation, but at the same time he's the greatest creation. So that, as well as the fact that Sufism manifested itself in art, in craftsmanship, in science, mathematics. And so looking at that bandwidth or that wide spectrum of influence that Sufism had, it was but inevitable that I lost myself to it. To your second part of the question about why did I write it as a novel? I did spend many years, thinking about how I could, tell the story of Yusuf and Zulekha, or for that matter, the passionate love that Ibn Arabi has for Nizam, and at the same time, how does one write about this extraordinary mind of Omar Khayyam, where you have mathematics and mysticism merging seamlessly? And I thought, it would be actually quite it would be vital to tell a human story through which these elements would emerge, and the reader could then enjoy a narrative which is relatable, as well as not deviating from the core ethos of Sufism. So yeah, that's how I went about it.
You've done it so beautifully in the book. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it, and I'm sure whoever reads it, and there are many people today with us who are hearing us, and I hope all of you will buy and read the book. He's done a wonderful job in that. But Moin, another thing I was thinking about is that today when we think of Sufism, we think of dargahs, we think of kabbals, we think of that heady fragrance of incense and rose and the petals, etc. We forget that actually Sufism is a rigorous ethical discipline, and at the heart of it is the Wahdatul Wujud, the concept that Ibn al-Arabi uh, propounded. And there are the fact that it is not an easy path, not everybody can just start on it. So can you, and you tie this up in your book also, when you talk of a point in which you say that it is from this point where classical Sufism starts to decline. So can you just give us a short for the hearers and the listeners who are here, a brief account of the what Sufism actually is, and the growth, as well as what Ibn al-Arabi was talking about when he talked about Wahdatul Wujud.
I think you've struck upon a very important chord, Rana Appa, when how you started off your question. You're absolutely right. The manifestation of Sufism as that takes you to dargahs, or that takes you to the shrine of the very revered saint, so that you get a boon granted, is something that we all do, and I've done that. I still do that, and listening to the qawwalis is absolutely glorious, and it's deeply soothing, no doubt. But it is not the complete, if you would say, essence of Sufism. It is just one rendition or one aspect of it. And I, for one, make it amply clear when people ask me, "Are you a Sufi?" I say, "No, I'm not. I'm someone who's inclined towards it. I'm someone who's drawn and absorbed in it, but I'm not a Sufi as one would expect a Sufi murshid to be. It takes an elevated thinking and an extraordinary amount of great, as you rightly said, discipline. There's a lot of inward journey, internal introspection, a sense of khidmatul khalq, which basically means your selfless service to humanity. How do you carry yourself through tasawwuf, which is deep meditation and contemplation? And so it's Sufism when it gets when Rumi gets quoted, when there's some quotes of Rumi that are put on music CDs and all of that, it baffles me, because that really isn't what it was about. It was about a really discipline. I wouldn't use the word strict, it wasn't, but a sense of discipline in administering yourself in a space that you've been given, and that space is life. And how do you administer yourself within that greater realm that you as a microcosm are occupying? And how do you see yourself in the true words, and what is your stature as man as compared to the universe, the creative force that you're part of, etc., etc. Deep questions. And the stalwart philosopher who was a giant in many ways, and I wouldn't say he's forgotten, but as you rightly said, that when you talk about Rumi, or the West has made Rumi out to be this rock star, and he was not. And the one giant who actually was the champion of Sufi philosophy was Ibn Arabi. And he came up with this concept of Wahadatul Wajud, which basically means the unity of being and the absolute essence. And it's an incredibly, it's a difficult concept to understand. I wouldn't even say that I've come close to it. You can read Ibn Arabi 1,000 times over and you wouldn't have even come close to where he's reached. But in whatever time I had, and I had the good fortune to study Ibn Arabi in a university in Istanbul called the Koç University, and I also happened to read him in Andalusia, which was fantastic. Whatever little bit I've understood is Ibn Arabi sets the pace for creation, and he looks at the concept of creation and the result of creation through the lens of metaphysics. And his belief is that there is this unity of being, and from that unity of being which exists, you have different attributes. And now I'm just completely simplifying it because it's a very, very deeply complicated subject. And Ibn Arabi was, accused of pantheism, and his books were burned in Bukhara for what he had written. But anyways, so you've got the unity of being, and from the unity of being, you've got attributes. So you can have mercy as an attribute. You could have wadud, called love, as an attribute. You could have magnificence as an attribute. And all these attributes are given names, which went on to become the 99 names of Allah. And those attributes, according to Ibn Arabi, manifest themselves in every creation that the unity of being has created. So in many ways, you start becoming a part of that overarching supreme creative essence. And so when he put that concept out, it was very difficult for the petty-minded, if I may use that word, the petty-minded clerics to understand. And they could not understand where this man was coming from or what he was saying. And it was only over a period of time when he was written about, analyzed in greater depth by many other Sufis, including Hazrat Abdul Quddus Gangohi, who lies buried in Uttar Pradesh, and many other great Sufis, did the concept of the unity of being and then the other attributes, and the attributes get a sense of understanding. So yeah, that's my humble answer to your question.
That's a beautifully, very well explained, because as you said, it's a very, very difficult concept and it takes almost an age. Even I am just I'm at the beginning trying to understand it.
Yeah,
And all of us are, I think, outsiders trying to understand Sufism, because to become a Sufi, to become take a bayat, that is an oath of allegiance, all that requires a lot of discipline, and it's a lifelong quest. So we are still outside looking at it.
exactly.
And another thing, in your book, there's this sentence which struck me as very, very interesting, something which I'm sure everybody is going to, whoever reads it, enjoy. There has been, Sufism has also produced a lot of literature, and as you rightly talked about Umar Khayyam and his contributions to astronomy, and Ibn al-Arabi to metaphysics, etc., etc. Uh, there was a lot of emphasis on ilm, aql. बिना अकल के इश्क हो ही नहीं सकता है. That is the premise कि जब तक आप to understand, you to know him, you have to first understand yourself, and to understand yourself you need ilm and aql. So there is your hero at one point of time, I think it is Qaraar, who says, somebody asks who's Leonardo da Vinci, and the answer is he's Umar Khayyam of the West. So I'd like you to just go a little forward on that. Talk about the emphasis on the sciences, on ilm, on aql, and talk about the development of science in the East. Because I know that you mentioned in your book the Lost Enlightenment by Frederick Starr. And he has talked extensively about how developed the sciences were in the medieval ages.
Yes, and the Sufis who I think it's important to also take one step further back to understand. Well, I mean, not to understand, but at least try and get a sense of what that Sufi mind was. The first thing that happened when the Sufis understood the likes of Hazrat Ali, who, according to most of the Sufis, was the first Sufi, and Ibn Arabi. They went into an inward journey, understanding themselves inward. And the minute you started that inward journey, there was a sense of I wouldn't say awakening, but a sense of an intelligent quotient that kicks in within, where you become curious. So all these Sufis had an incredibly curious mind. They wanted to know geography, they wanted to know the world, they wanted to know the earth, they wanted to know the streams, the rivers, how did they flow, how did the forests survive on their own, the atmosphere, science became the next door that they opened because of the curiosity of mind. The first thing that happened to them because of the inward journey was the development, as you said, aql, the development of a mind that is curious, that is open to innovation, and that is open to invention, and that is a mind that is not constrained by dogmas. The minute that happens, you have the Sufis then foraying into the sciences under the overarching umbrella of spirituality and the unity of creation. So they are not divorcing themselves from spirituality. Neither are they divorcing themselves from their faith. They are taking those elements and becoming innovative, curious, and inventive. As a result of that, you have this flourishing of Sufis that really starts in somewhere, I would suspect, in the ninth or 10th century. And then there's a real battery of Sufis. They're a constellation, they're a galaxy that emerges from Central Asia and then into Persia. Deeply influenced by the mathematics of India and of Greece. These Sufis take it onto themselves to take a deeper dive into it. And so what you start seeing from the 9th century onwards are the likes of Al-Khwarizmi, who is in Persia, and who starts learning about this fantastic Indian mathematician called Brahmgupta, and he unequivocally, pays glowing tributes to Brahmgupta. Then you have, Umar Khayyam, who, really advocates the fact that it is through understanding spirituality that you can understand logic. Now, this is probably one of the most difficult concepts to understand, because what he's saying is, under the banner of spirituality, you have logic and reason, and the system, the organized system of mathematics comes within that. So, and then by the time he's studying in the libraries of Merv, which is in modern day Turkmenistan, he's inventing modern day cubic equations. He's understanding the relationship between metals and alloys. He's trying to figure out, how do the metals and alloys exist simultaneously. And then you have the likes of Qudat al-Hamdan, who's deeply entrenched in Sufism, and goes on to become a mathematician who takes Omar Khayyam's geometry even further. Then you have Buzjani, who comes up with concepts of the polyhedrals and the triangles, merging together. So you have this constellation of great minds emerging out of Central Asia, and then making their way into Persia, deeply curious about the world, about the sciences, about mathematics. And then, of course, you have the giant like Ibn Sina. And there was much debate whether Ibn Sina was a Sufi or no, but Ernst Bloch, who's a great student of Ibn Sina, in his book Avicenna and the Aristotelian Left, makes it amply clear that Ibn Sina was given to mysticism and a sense of deep spirituality in his writings. And then you've got Ibn Sina, who writes probably the greatest encyclopedia known as the Canon of Medicine, which goes on to become the greatest book on medicine in the East and the West. So the East had its fantastic glory days, right from Brahmagupta, and then this incredible burst of a galaxy of great Sufi theologians as well as scientists emerging from Central Asia. And that span is all the way from the 9th century till the 14th century, because the greatest jewel, if I would say, that emerged in Andalusia after the death of Ibn Arabi was Ibn Khaldun. And in the 14th century, Ibn Khaldun is the first man to sit down and say that history and geography should be addressed as sciences, not merely as chroniclers who write history, but also understand, how does history affect sociology? How does sociology affect our societies and geography? So, that was the effulgence and the effervescence of this fantastic Sufi mind that absorbed. That mind became a sponge. It absorbed knowledge, and that's how it kind of flourished.
And you then go on, beautifully explain, Moin. And you then go on to, of course, talk about the fact, you say that Europeans were pushing the boundaries, while the three great empires, that is the Safavid, the Ottomans, and the Mughals, were on the decline. And you make a point that this is where classical Sufism starts to decline, and even the knowledge as that you talked about so eloquently. So can you just elaborate on that for our audience?
So, as we get into the latter half of the 17th century, three events happen which, in my humble opinion, signal the end of this curious, innovative, inventive Sufi mind. First is the death of Dara Shikoh, who was not just a Sufi for the sake of being a Sufi. He was a practicing Sufi. The works of Dara Shikoh, I don't even need to talk in great detail about them, because they are accepted and known as masterpieces, particularly his Majma al-Bahrain. The compassion that Mia Mir instilled in Dara Shikoh's heart towards cultivators, once again, is a very well-known fact. So Dara Shikoh is murdered in 1659. In 1666, Shah Abbas II, who was again one of the finest minds, dies at a very young age. He died at the age of 35. And his Persia was, this intellectual bastion, a melting pot of thinkers, philosophers, writers, poets. The likes of Saib Tabrizi were in his court. And he dies, unfortunately, in 1666. And in 1683, against the wishes of the Sufis, the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed VI attacks Vienna and loses. And from these three events onwards, you have the contraction of these empires and the diminishing influence of the Sufi in their intellectual theaters. Because you suddenly have, I wouldn't say an immediate vacuum, I wouldn't say that, but you don't have that Sufi influence where he is in court influencing the ruler to invest in science, mathematics, innovation, ocean navigation, painting, literature, poetry, and you see that contracting from the late 1600s. And as you're one of the finest historians in Delhi, Apa, I don't need to tell you this, but it takes time for decay to set in. And as 200 years or 300 years pass, the Sufi is then confined, as we've spoken about, only to going to a dargah and making a wish and listening to a kavali and going away home. I mean, it's beautiful. I still do that and I still enjoy it. But the larger cultural realm of the Sufi has diminished in luster.
And I hope that your book comes and fills in that gap.
That's very sweet.
Thank you so much. And the one part of your book, something very dear to me, is the architectural aspect of it. So architecture in the Islamic world was inspired by the sense that it is sacred and therefore also a replica of the cosmos and the locus of the encounter of man. Sorry. And the locus of the encounter of man and the divine world. And everything led to the oneness of the divine. And that's what you've talked about. The square shape reflected the holy Kaaba. The octagonal shape called Hasht Bahesht was inspired by the divine throne, which we call Arsh, which is supported by 8 angels. The dome was a reminder of the vault of heaven, beyond which is infinity. That came through so beautifully in your book. Can you please explain for us the term sacred geometry, which I've heard you talk about very often, apart from the book, before this also? And what do you mean by Gireh-Sazi, the importance of Gireh-Sazi? And the second part of this question, so that you can continue that, is why was restoration so important for Qaraar, more than creation? And why did Qaraar find it easy to restore but difficult to create? And how does Qaraar go through this journey? And I'll ask you, after you answered that, I'll ask you to read out a passage from your book.
Sure. I think the origins of Girah are in, it's debated, heatedly debated amongst experts. And I'm not an expert on that. I had the good fortune to listen to Peter Liu, who's an expert on geometric tile work in the Islamic world. He's a Korean professor, absolutely fantastic. So there are a lot of debates. They say some say it originated in Central Asia, some say it originated in Persia, some say in Arabia. No one really knows the real truth as to where it originated from. But Girah in Farsi, in Persian, means knot, to tie a knot. And the Sufis were at the forefront of craftsmanship in their khanqahs, in their retreats, in their schools and madrasas. And one of the crafts that they propagated was Gireh tile making. And the tile making is all about these fantastic geometric shapes knitting together and coming together. And when they come together in their variety and in their diversity of shape, they all culminate in a star. That star is supposed to be the sign of enlightenment or an illuminated mind. And as you rightly pointed out, the square resembles the Kaaba, the octagon is the quest of the infinite, and which is all about interlocking the diversity that we behold in our eyes in our quest towards enlightenment. Now, when I was in Bursa, which many experts say boasts of the finest geometric tile work in the world, and I didn't know that till I actually went there. There's this small mosque. It's called the Yesel Kami Mosque. It's called the Green Mosque. And when you go in there, it's rather unassuming. But when you look around and you look at the blue geometric tile work, it is absolutely glorious. You have octagons, pentagons, triangles, all of them coming together, knitted together, and then reaching out towards the star that is almost, beckoning them. And then they repeat the design so that it gives you this pattern of infinity. And I happened to meet a Sufi there. And there was a craftsman as well. And they spoke about the sacred geometry. And they told me about how greatly influenced, these empires, whether it was the Ottomans or the Safavids or the Mughals, how greatly influenced the craftsmen were because of Girasazi, because it truly appealed to that heart of the Sufi that brought people together. And their explanation was probably not as probably not as articulate as the way you've explained it, but they were people, they were men of hand and clay. And they said, the square represents a different race. The star represents a different race. The triangle represents another culture. And it's all about different cultures coming together as mankind to better ourselves and to seek enlightenment. And that is the juice of Girahasazi. It is about bringing human beings together and then displaying that as an art form.
I think that coming together is what you bring together so beautifully in your book. And that brings me to the next part of this question, which is the art of restoration, which Qaraar is so good at. And can you read a short passage from your book to explain how Qaraar, through the journey of his life, restores the spiritual lives of his friends like Alf, the slave trader, Huwa, the prostitute, Gul, the unloved royal princess, and the hated acrobat brothers, because he restores all their lives.
Yes, and I'll just take a step backwards. I thought it was vital that I create a character that is sensitive, that is vulnerable, and through his eyes and through his feelings and through his turbulent life, the reader will be able to see the philosophies of Sufis that he uses to restore his life. And he's a craftsman in Delhi. He's young. He's in love with a woman. And he sees in her the link to the divine. And her name is Abira. And he's not besotted by her. He's actually deeply, deeply in love with her, because he uses the philosophy of Ibn Arabi to see the attributes of the divine in her. And there are parts of the book where he tells her that because she asks him, "I don't see you going to a mosque," and he says, "I don't need to, because in you carry the divine quality of rahmat or mercy, and if I see that in you, I can see that I can see him." So these are the philosophies of the Sufis through which he is able to understand what it is to be in love, and what it is to love the divine through the created. Ishke hakiki through ishke majazi. And she, in many ways, is not just an inspiration, but she's his. Is probably what Beatrice was to Dante, or what Nizam was to Ibn Arabi, or what Shak-e-Nabat was to Hafiz. it's that link where you are able to see such beauty in that one person that you're able to behold the divine. And unfortunately, without revealing the plot of the book too much, he loses Abira, and his life is nothing but an arid desert because he can't create without her, and he's not able to put things together. But before all of that happens, he is under the guidance of a Sufi who migrates from Isfahan during turbulent times, and who takes him under his wing and has taught him this really unique art form called Gire Sazi, which is making geometric tiles. And it is through that compassionate heart of the Sufi that he learns how to knit different shapes of geometry together into creating these beautiful aspects of these beautiful panels of tiles. But as luck has it, he loses Abira, and he kind of he's trained by the Sufi to restore, not to create, because the Sufi coaches him into believing that restoration is more important than creativity, because creativity needs restoration. Restoration doesn't need creativity. It is that aspect of restoration where you're able to go deep within yourself and bring life back and give something back to something that's been damaged and broken. And so that becomes symbolic of his life. And as he begins this journey towards Central Asia and Iran, typically like a Gireh tile, he attracts different characters to him. He lands up meeting Alf, who's a slave trader, who's a ruthless man. And then he lands up meeting Hova, who's a prostitute. He lands up meeting Gul, who's an Ottoman princess who's never really had true love in her life. And then he lands up meeting two brothers who are acrobats, but who've been tormented all their lives. And through the compassion in his heart and through his art, he influences their lives into finding spiritual bliss, if you wish, or spirituality. So I'll just read a small passage. I'll read two passages, if that's okay, two rather small passages. One is a passage when he's in Istanbul and he's restoring, he's restoring some tile work, and one of the Ottoman princesses, is quite smitten by him, but she's had a life of heartbreaks, and how he kind of makes her believe that the only way to look at love or get true love is by destroying your ego. So I'll read that passage first. Qaraar looked at Gul and said, "What matters is true love. Where can I find it?" She pressed her forehead against his shoulder. "Let it come to you." "I have been waiting so long." As they got up to leave the library, Qaraar gave his hand to Gul. Helping her up, he said, "Rumi says carnal ego gets in the way of true love. Overcome ego and love will find you." Their friendship grew, and Gul began spending more time with the troupe. When Qaraar couldn't accompany the troupe for their performances, Gul went with them instead. She displayed Qaraar's styles on his behalf. Gul loved being with the troupe. It was freedom. Then it happened. One day, Gul was able to get permission for the troupe to visit the shrine of Gul Baba in Budapest. Gul Baba was a much revered Sufi by Christians and Muslims alike, and for his Urs celebrations, the Habsburgs gave special permission for pilgrims to travel from the Ottoman lands. Gul meant rose, and she had been named after the great Sufi. After weeks of traveling, the troupe reached Budapest. On a little hill next to the shrine of Gul Baba, various stalls were assembled, and the area was bursting with festive spirit. When it came for the troupe, the two acrobats led the way. Hikmat, who was one of the acrobats, did splendidly and was showered with coins. Gul noticed that, and instead of keeping all the coins for himself, Izzat, Hikmat's brother, ran towards the destitute and gave them some. It was pure kindness of heart. Then came Izzat's turn to do acrobats. Against the backdrop of Saad's drum beats, Izzat's attempts to walk the tightrope in midair failed as he slipped and fell. The crowd jeered. He got up and tried again. Saad increased the volume of his drumming, but he failed again. Izzat dusted himself, got up again on the tightrope and walked. Veering slowly, he somehow reached the middle of the rope and looked down, catching Gul's eyes. There was only truth and sincerity in his eyes. When mockery was at its sharpest, Gul's heart absorbed it and reflected love back. Effortlessly, while still looking at her, Izzat completed the other half of the tightrope. The crowd's jeering turned into cheering. How fickle men were. At the shrine of the hermit Gul Baba, Gul, the royal princess, had found true love in Izzat, the acrobat.
Beautiful. Beautifully done. Good.
And I'll read one last quick passage, which is at a time when, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted it to be a human story, because sin is again another thing that's debated, so often. And the way one particular Sufi looked at sin inspired me to write this particular passage, and his name was Sarmad. And there is no one in this world who hasn't sinned. We all have. And Qaraar, at this point in time in his life, is a murderer. He has left his home. He is in love with a lady, and he's also sired a child that is not from wedlock. So he's carrying this enormous burden of sin. And it is only through a prostitute who guides him towards the verses of the great Sufi poet Sarmad that he finds some solace. One night, Qaraar woke in the middle of the night shivering, having broken into a cold sweat. He got out of bed, wrapped himself in a shawl, and rushed down the stone stairs of the guest house. Flinging the door open, he sat on the steps that opened out into the street, breathing heavily. There was nothing but silence. An ominous feeling of being sinful descended on him. He thought of his relationship with Catalina, which in reality wasn't formally within the confines of a marriage, and about Sana, his love child with Abira. He felt an acute sense of conflict within him. His love for both Catalina and Sana was deep and sparkled with truth, but yet the voice of sin gnawed at his conscience. He whispered questions to the divine, at times begging for forgiveness, and yet also thanking the divine for making him the benefactor of true love. His face was buried in his shawl, his lips murmuring those questions, when he heard the approach of soft footsteps and a voice. What sin are you talking about? Look at me. Hova? Yes, Hova, who was once a prostitute. Do you want to talk to me about sin? Hova also hadn't been able to sleep that night, and when she heard Qaraar rushing down the steps, she had followed him. Then she continued, Fate has its ways. You and I are only its slaves. I didn't choose to be sold as a prostitute. Qaraar nodded as he felt a lightness listening to Hova. We sit not far from Sarmad's shrine. Hova pointed in its direction. Think of these verses and hold them close to you when you feel burdened of sin. No doubt that greater than sin is your mercy. Always everywhere, I've all of my sins added up totally. Though from head to foot, I'm filled with sins, in spite of this, they do not exceed your mercy, obviously.
It was very, very beautiful. And something that we often forget is that God's mercy is far more overpowering than his wrath. And that he talks of his mercy. हम कुरान भी जब पढ़ते हैं तो बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम कह के ही पढ़ते हैं. So the thing that we keep emphasizing is his benevolence and his compassion. And that's another, brings me to another line in your book which struck me, and I'd like you to talk about that. you write, for the Sufis, the Holy Quran wasn't a rule book to impose on others, but undertaking a journey within oneself. Now, we read the Quran, we read it very often, and we read it mostly without understanding it. Even those who understand do not understand the mystical meaning behind it. That is only for maybe the जिनको कहते हैं बहुत पहुंचे हुए हैं जो Sufi hai, only they can understand the mystical meaning. Can you just explain what you meant by this? That it's not a rule book; it's a journey.
Yeah, and that's a lovely question. It's at a stage in the book when Qaraar finds himself in Bursa, which is a small town now, not far from Istanbul, and he happens to encounter a Sufi calligrapher who talks to him about many things besides. He talks about power and politics and how the Sufis viewed power and politics, but he also talks to him about how the Sufis looked at the Quran as well as themselves, and they did not see the Quran as something that is meant to be imposed on you, on me, on others. It was not a rule book. It was supposed to be uh, uh, a book to guide you, to understand yourself. It was supposed to be understood as Ibn Rushd once said, understand the Quran as a philosophy. Don't understand it as a rule book. Understand it about how do you as man see yourself amongst others, amongst nature, amongst the greater creative elements that have been created. And so um, it's about taking the aspects of the Quran, which are deeply spiritual, things like mercy, things like understanding the quality of forgiveness that we should all have within ourselves, and most importantly, eliminating hypocrisy. In Urdu and in Arabic, I think there's a word called munafiqat, which the Sufis strived to get rid of. And they thought that the Quran was the way to go within and understand the hypocrisy within themselves, which pervades everyone, and overcome hypocrisy and destroy ego and hypocrisy within. So it was about understanding the Quran in a way which was philosophical rather than a rule book to be imposed, but something that would create a desire to simply just understand yourself.
That's so beautifully explained. And I'll just have one last question before we take on the audience questions. There are quite a few of that. Like Qaraar, you have also traveled from the east to the west. So my question to you is, the the saying, it's an eternal saying, बहुत ही favorite saying है कि home is where the heart is. So have you found your dil ka qarar in the West, in London now? And I know that your book is dedicated to Leonie, and आप उनको बहुत प्यार से बेगम मीर बुलाते हैं. So have you found your muse in her? It's a
um,
personal question.
that is such a sweet question. In many ways, the answer to that is a big, bold yes. And it, um, yes, I think I crave for the East, no doubt. When I was traveling through India, Delhi for research, Turkey, Andalusia, all of these places. It was a journey, yes, but I have to admit, I have found peace in the West, and I have found a place where I can be myself, and a place from where I can, embark on many journeys within. Yes, Leonie has been vitally important for this book. If it wasn't for her, the book wouldn't have been written, and it's as simple as that. And I think when you meet someone who is, uh, who gives you that ability, not ability, sorry, gives you that, um, um, or allows you to link yourself with the beauty within her, then creativity and creation, whether it's a book or it's art or it's craft, it becomes way easier.
That is something that comes through in your book because of the way that you have described how initially Abira and then Catalina both serve as not just ke wo ishq haqiqi hai and ishq majazi hai, but they are both the muse of Qaraar. And that is something that over the, I think the 1 year that I've known you and I've seen your conversations and been following you, is the feeling that I got that Leonie is your muse. So I'm glad about that.
It's very true.
So we come now to the audience question. So the first question is from Hasnan Waris, and he wrote it just as I think our conversation started. So he says, can relate to the lure bit Muin. I think you talked about the lure of Sufism. Did you face any resistance of your own beliefs in your journey, like in most of the cases? If yes, how did you tackle it?
um, uh, Resistance towards, sorry, what, I lost you there, Apak. If you could just repeat
I
that.
think resistance is talking about the lure of Sufism, and did you
Yeah.
face any resistance in that?
Yes, I did. I often questioned certain things. I questioned aspects of, of, uh, for example, when you go to a shrine, there is this narrative, which is, you only ask of God. You don't go to a shrine and ask for, things, and all of that was there, as I was growing up. But I left that behind, and I looked at the more deeper aspects and the more important aspects. It didn't bother me if I was at a shrine of a great Sufi, and I was, and I was, deeply submissive to what the teachings of that Sufi were. There was no conflict within me at that time. I had left that. For me, what was important was to understand their teachings. For me, what was important was to understand, for example, what was amazing was that there is a Sufi called Seh Bedruddin, whose poem I cite right in the beginning of my book, and he was an environmentalist. He spoke about protecting mountains, and forests and streams and rivers. And as I was getting deeper into Sufism, all those little petty conflicts, which were there, indeed they were there initially as a child or as a teenager when I was growing up, they faded away. And I realized that this is such an enormous ocean of knowledge that being stuck in little petty debates was not what these men left us with. Or for that matter, even ladies, Rabia Basri, for example. That kind of thinking was what was luring me, rather than, and I was able to break those shackles, which helped me immensely.
I hope, Hasnan, your question has been answered. I think it's been very well articulated by Muin. Sayyid Rehan asks, can you tell us about Ilme Ghaib from Sufism point of view?
So Ilme Ghaib is once again a deeply, deeply complex, complex, concept. And I keep stressing this right at the beginning, during our conversation. I was stressing that these are very complex subjects. To say that you have dastarasti or mahariyat in Urdu, which are two words, is something I would never do. Ilme ghaib is the knowledge of from the hidden, and it is acquired by Sufis who are deeply meditative, contemplative, through tasawwuf, where they go deep into themselves to understand their failings. And the first thing they do is to understand what are their failings, as man. What are the things that they have done, which are, which are not necessarily something that they would be proud of. Addressing those, destroying them, and then opening their heart to knowledge, whether it is from anyone, and accepting knowledge from the hidden. So the word ghaib, which basically means the unknown or the hidden, you only get that ilm ghaib when you're able to go deep within, understand your own hypocrisy, understand your own failings, address them, overcome them, and then open your heart to all the knowledge that is going to come from the unknown. But it's a very, very complex concept, and I don't have the expertise in that.
There is somebody who's asking, apart from tasawwuf, what is another untranslatable loves you associate closely with Sufism?
Untranslatable. Um, to be fair, you're right. To translate words like tasawwuf, or even for that matter, to translate, let's say, khidmat-e khalq, is so difficult. Khidmat-e khalq basically means the service of mankind. Now, it's a very simple thing to translate. You serve mankind, but how do you spiritually or philosophically understand that in your day-to-day life, in your day-to-day aspect? Very difficult to understand, very difficult to translate it into 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 uh, into English, or into day-to-day practice. Even for that matter, there's a concept called baqa, which comes after fana. And it's very easy. Once again, I say it's very easy for us to say fana is when you reach a sense of salvation and you've kind of cut off from the world and all of that. Then from there you go into baqa, which is a sense of just existence. And that existence is what Ibn Sina writes about, just existing. And then your soul becomes a sense of just a rational intellectual. Listen, these are deep, deep concepts. But I would say, if you were to ask me which are the untranslatable ones, I would say baqa, definitely translatable, and very deep to understand and difficult to understand, and khidmat e khalq.
Even ishq for that matter. We just have a
Ish.
simple word love in English. But
Yeah,
I was having a conversation once with Professor Shamsur Rahman Faruqi, and he told me, he said there are 18 words for love in Urdu. And
yeah,
he went on to give it to me. And, he mailed me those 18 words. And it's, each word is a different words. It
yes,
expresses a different feeling. Just as you so beautifully explained, ishke majazi and ishke haqiqi, they are both very different things. But
yeah,
how do you explain that? So there are many terms which जिसको कहते हैं ना कि जब वो समंदर में डूबते हैं तभी you
yeah.
start to get that. Simon Varghese is asking, Muin, while researching for the book, did you get a feeling that Sufism would make a comeback when Islamic fundamentalism is creating havoc globally?
Did I get a Islamic fundamentalism is a plague. Uh, it is there. We can't deny that. It is. Well, I wouldn't call it Islamic fundamentalism, because Islam doesn't teach any sense of extremism. But it is extremism done in the name of a faith which is absolutely it's a completely wrong narrative. And Sufism, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, is the heart of Islam. It is the heartbeat of Islam, which has been lost because of a sense of, I would say, degeneration of mind amongst people. They are not. They're not. They have lost that sense of, as I mentioned right at the beginning, the curiosity of the Sufi mind, the innovativeness of the Sufi mind, the inventiveness of the Sufi mind, the creativity of the Sufi mind. And I do hope that one day it will come back, because it's there. You just have to reach deep within yourself.
True. Manav Sachdev is asking, even Ahle Tasawwuf can't claim that they are Sufis, but dervishes on the path. And it is perhaps up to the master to decide when and how and who has reached which station.
I lost your first bit.
The Ahle Tasawwuf also cannot claim to be anything except dervishes on the path. Well, that is up to
Very
the master to decide.
true, true. And these are the various tariqas that were there. You know, you had the Chishtis, you had the Naqshbandis, you had the Mevlavis, and all of them had their way of guiding their disciples. I have ensured that I didn't go into what were the do's and don'ts of each tariqa, because I didn't want my book to be a lecture or a sermon. I wanted it to be a human story from where you get the real essence of Sufism. And of course, the protagonist is under is taken under the wings of a murshid who's of a Qadriya order and who guides him, but he guides him through art, craftsmanship, mathematics, and spirituality. And you're right, you know, it is up to the master to say whether the disciple has reached a particular stage or no. That's true.
True. Madhuri Kulkarni is asking, is Sufism relatable to Advaita Vedanta?
I would think so, yes. There are many aspects in the Majma ul Bahrain where Dara Shikoh, you know, tries to show the common ground between Sufism or Islam and Hinduism, and he talks greatly about Ruh-e Azam, which is the concept of the great soul in Islam, and Paramatma, which is the concept of the great soul in Hinduism. He talks about Sarva Prakasha and Noor, you know. So he talks about these elements, and he studied the Vedas. I'm not an expert on the Vedas, but yes, absolutely, there are so many elements of the Upanishads, for example, and the Vedas, which are very similar to the Quran. In fact, Dara Shikoh went on to say that the Upanishads were the hidden book that is mentioned in the Quran, and it is a book that must be read by everyone.
Yes. Nilofer says that thanks, very engaging. As an Iranian, I am inspired to read Mr. Mir's book and always touched to see see these deep influences of our civilizations, thinkers on each other. What does Mr. Mir hope to explore after this?
I'm researching a book that is set between basically set in Morocco, and I've just about started scratching the surface of research. I haven't quite even begun, but it'll be a book that is set in Morocco.
Exciting. I haven't been to Morocco, but I think it's a beautiful place. I have seen some photographs and read about it. Uh, Tanishka is asking, what is the concept of a darwish and how can we understand it in the context of Sufism in today's world?
Very, very difficult to understand it in the concept of today's world. It is, in my opinion, and I could be once again completely wrong, it almost doesn't exist. The dervishes and that is how I begin my book, that those three events in the late 17th century brought an end to that kind of thinking. That the dervish was a deeply, the thought of the dervish was a deeply humble thought. It meant complete extermination and destruction of your ego. And once you were able to do that, you were able to go to the doors of knowledge. It is believed by some people, it's not my opinion, but it's believed by some people that the word darvish comes from dar means door and vesh means to approach. So these people were approaching the doors of knowledge by singularly annihilating the concept of ego within them. And that concept of being that true darvish, which you would have probably encountered in 15th century Turkey, or even in Delhi, or in Central Asia, I don't think they exist now. I'm afraid they don't. It's not about seeing a Baba Fakir in a long cloak and a long beard and saying he's a dervish. I mean, you can say whatever you wish, but that that mind of that dervish, where he's supposed to go from door to door to seek knowledge. Dar means door, as I mentioned. That doesn't, in modern days concept, you don't see that, and that is why I call it the lost fragrance of infinity. It really is the lost fragrance.
Quite true. ना वो दर बचे हैं ना वो वेश बचे हैं. Somebody has asked, do you celebrate the Sufi umbrella that has enlarged the love for Islam, even though non-Sufi followers haven't given Sufism approval? Or do you feel there is a need to reconcile Sufi tariqat approval with the mainstream Islam for this cognitive struggle to end and for Islam to be fully loved and understood? Should I read it again?
If you wouldn't mind, please. Thank you.
Do you celebrate the Sufi umbrella that has enlarged the love for Islam, even though non-Sufi followers haven't given Sufism approval? Or do you feel there is a need to reconcile Sufi tariqat approval with the mainstream Islam for this cognitive struggle to end and for Islam to be fully loved and understood? I think he's trying to place Sufism outside Islam. That is what I've tried to understand, which I don't think is. I leave that to you to answer.
No, I celebrate Sufism's. I celebrate Sufism's beauty, and I celebrate Sufism's contributions wholeheartedly. It is an unimpeachable part of Islam. You cannot say that Sufism is not a part of Islam. It is the heart, in my opinion, the heartbeat of Islam. The trouble is that they have always been, and there will always be, a struggle between the typical cleric who's confined to seeing things like a rule book and confined to a bit of how do I put this? Uh, not being as curious or innovative as the Sufi. The Sufi was a very innovative. The Sufis were very innovative, without digressing from the tenets of Islam. They stayed true to the tenets of Islam. They were followers of the faith, deep followers of the faith, but deeply curious. So yes, I celebrate the accomplishments of the Sufis. And as far as this debate goes, in terms of conflict with the people who have not given Sufism the legitimacy or something like that, I think it's something which I wouldn't even want to go towards that, because it's a conflict in my mind that shouldn't even exist, because Sufism is about love, acceptance, compassion, humanity, exploration, bettering mankind. And if you don't accept that, then what do you accept?
Very well said. There's one more question, and I think you talked about this. Is Ishke Majazi and Ishke Hakiki inextricably linked? Can a Sufi reach one without the other? This is something that's very interesting, because a lot of people get confused between what is Ishke Hakiki and what is Ishke Majazi.
Difficult to answer. Very, very difficult to answer. I'm not a Sufi sheikh, but I think there are times in people's lives where you are somehow in a position in life where you connect with the supreme creative force through a beautiful creation. And as I've said, sometimes people can't understand that. Ibn Arabi, who was the giant philosopher, his works were burnt in Bukhara, because they thought it was pantheism. But I think Ishq-e Majazi is a beautiful thing. It does allow you to appreciate and even engage with ishq hakiki. And if that does happen, it should be welcomed.
Regarding the question that I had asked you earlier, Manav had asked, he's saying, I'm not placing Sufism outside Islam. I'm asking about disapproval of Sufism by clerics and typical followers of Islam. Reconciliation for typical followers to accept Sufism as part of Islam, actually, so opposite of what you understood. So I'm sorry, Manav, that's the question was actually a little difficult for me to understand. So that's my mistake. So he just wants to know about the disapproval of clerics of Sufism.
Yeah, disapproval or approval is something which, to be fair, at some point in time, the Sufis didn't even care about that, because they had reached the height of intellectual stimulation. In my humble opinion, as I mentioned at the latter half of that answer, was Sufism is about love. It's about destruction of ego. It's about being innovative. It's about being inventive, curious. It's about being fabulously, um, uh, uh, you know, creative. And if that is not accepted by whoever, so be it. Because what will you accept if you don't accept these beautiful things? And I want to take a step back. As you mentioned, in my book, I talk about Leonardo da Vinci. And Leonardo da Vinci had urged the Western people, the Western intellectuals, to translate the works of Ibn Sina, to translate the works of Hafiz, to translate the works of Ibn Arabi, because someone with such a beautiful mind like Leonardo da Vinci was able to see the merits of the mind of the Sufi. And he talks about how mankind is an indefinite, infinite network of different patterns, exactly the same language as the Sufis.
Selina Rashid is asking, we have just 10 minutes, so I'm just taking 4 questions now. Why is it that we find such a deep chasm between deen and dunya today? Is it correct to assert that Sufism has through history embodied the essence of both?
Has through history?
Embodied the essence of both, deen and dunya.
Absolutely. And it's a fantastic question, because you don't, I mean, of course, you have ascetics who left the daily day-to-day life and took up a life of asceticism and solitude. But by and large, the Sufis stayed in the dunya. They stayed with their faith in the world. They absolutely merged the two, and they were able to live that life of deen and dunya together. And they did not see it as two different elements. In fact, they saw it as a responsibility to be a part of the world. There's a famous saying, be part of the world, but not necessarily of it.
There's one question from Amna Ali from Pakistan. She's asking, could you tell us a little about your writing process as well as the time that you took to write this book? What were the journeys you undertook for your research?
I undertook a lot of reading of academic work, because I thought this book should be a book that is also deeply ensconced within academic work, not necessarily just be a book that is only a human story. It had to be a human story, but embedded against the backdrop of historical events that were researched and philosophies that were researched. So I did a lot of academic reading, a lot of travel, an enormous amount of travel from Fatehpur Sikri to Delhi to Anatolia to Istanbul, into Andalusia, Spain, and a lot of reading in their libraries, a lot of reading in the library in Istanbul, and a lot of reading of poetry, and trying to be as true to those translations that I possibly could. For example, the works it is impossible to translate Hafiz. It is impossible to translate Rumi. You just cannot. You cannot translate these giants. But the fact is, we write in English, or at least I write in English. And so I had to look at the scholarships of two uh, great men, Nicholson and Arbery, who are considered probably, not the, but probably the best translations that you could get your hand onto. So all of that went into writing the book, but travel played probably, in my opinion, the most important role, because unless and until you really fling yourself into a small little mosque in Bursa and meet a forgotten Sufi who's sitting around with his craftsmen, literally putting those geometric tiles together, and tells you about how they symbolize the beauty of mankind through diversity, interlocking in beauty, you can't write. Well, I couldn't write.
That's so true. You have to get your hands dirty, as they say, to be
Yeah.
able to write. And there's one in your book, you talk about, keep talking about Qaraar, who wants, an expedition to be sent to Indonesia. And
Beyond Indonesia.
and beyond Indonesia. And there's a question from Nazneen Humza who asks, fabulous presentation of concepts. Is there any Sufi peer who has studied ocean navigation with respect to routes to the western coast of India?
I wouldn't know that, Nazneen. It's a lovely question. I don't know that. But what I do know, that the Sufis of the Mevlavi order uh, had told Mehmed VI to concentrate on ocean navigation beyond the Atlantic. And that was a missed bus in many ways, because they didn't concentrate on that. What I also know is that Al-Khwarizmi was the first, in his book called The Book of Maps, if I'm not mistaken, to open up the outlines of the Pacific Ocean to us. And we didn't know about the existence of the Pacific Ocean till he had done that. The book is set in 1739 because the balance of power has shifted, and two massive land masses, one has already been discovered, that is America, and Australia is yet to be discovered, and the East is nowhere in discovery, but except the West, who's sailing all around and deeply involved in ocean navigation.
So I'm now taking the last question because we are running out of time. This is from Shaheen Nilofer, who talks about that she's enjoyed the conversation. She's traveled extensively in Central Asia. Uh, and she's asking, I would like to know, while there is an element of romanticism attached to the modern worldview of Sufism, as opposed to what you mentioned, and which resonates with me, is about Sufism being a philosophy and inward journey. And she goes on to ask, is it necessary to have a Sufi master and be the murid to follow Sufism?
Well, I would think yes, because that is just the way it was done down through the centuries. But the, the greatness of those Sufi masters was something that remains unmatched in today's day and age. Imagine sitting and listening to Hazrat Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi face to face. What an experience that would have been. Imagine sitting, head bowed and listening to Nizamuddin Aulia. What an experience that would have been. Or for that matter, imagine sitting head bowed and listening to Omar Khayyam talk about mathematics and mysticism. What an experience that would have been. Where are those minds? If you can find those minds, absolutely, find a murshid.
So as I think that was the last question. We don't have any time. I would like to just show that this is the book. Can everybody see it? The Lost Teachings of Infinity. It's available in all bookstores online. And Muin, there was one question: is this book available in America and UK?
Oh, yes, it is. And it's available on cmyk.com. So if you go, because Amazon is only delivering in India as of now, but on CMYK, they're delivering worldwide. Or you could go onto Rolly Books, which is my publisher, rollybooks.com, and they are delivering worldwide as well.
All the best for this book.
Yes. Well,
Thank you. Thank you.
What a fantastic, fantastic conversation. Thank you both. Thank you, Moin. I think that it's profound to see the depth of your um, research and the depth of your immersion in the philosophy of Sufism somehow emerging in this conversation. Your passion comes through, and I think that that has such a profound effect on you're talking about transforming this research into a novel. Had I not been ill, I would have read it by now, and I certainly look forward to doing so. It was really fantastic. And Rana, you did such a wonderful job of guiding us through this. I'm moved. I think that all of us live in a sort of a fragile kind of atmosphere these days. There's so much happening, or at least I do. There's so much happening emotionally. There's so much happening in the world that we're uncertain of. And to listen to the profundity of your talking about Sufism and its intellectual, creative, spiritual curiosity, and the impact it has on the way people think about mankind, about humankind. It was deeply moving. So thank you very much indeed. As a scientist, I have to say, I'm going to take a little moment to say that one of the scientists I deeply admired is someone called Dorothy Hodgkins, and she was the woman who first gave us the structure of a protein. And these proteins are big, complex molecules, and the maps that you get from all of the investigations, scientific investigations, are extremely hard to interpret. Now, of course, there's all kinds of mathematical formulae and all kinds of intriguing computer programs that allow you to decipher these maps. Still requires a great deal of work. But hers was the very first. And she always attributes her ability to be able to decipher these maps because her father was an archaeologist. And as a young woman, young girl woman, she spent a summer in Jordan deciphering, well, in this case, Byzantine mosaics. And they would get these little pieces, and she had to piece them together, and her mind was just seething with interpreting these and mapping these beautiful tiled creations. And that she attributes, that she says is the reason why she was able to get out the structure of insulin. So
That
I was
is
very moved.
absolutely beautiful, Indira. Exactly. Description,
Yeah.
gosh.
So anyway, thank you so much, Moin. What a fascinating, fascinating event. And thank you, Rana, and the IMAS, the BIC, we all are utterly grateful. It was
Thank you.
beyond expectation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.